Welcome to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. I'm your host, Jess Cording. I'm a registered dietitian, health coach, and author, and I'm here to help you streamline your wellness routine and establish a sane, more balanced relationship with food and fitness so you can reach your goals without losing your mind. On this podcast, we'll talk about nutrition, exercise, self-care, mindset, and more. I'll be bringing you interviews and expert insight on the topics that matter to your health and wellness. Hi, and welcome back to the Drama-Free Healthy Living podcast. I'm your host, Jess Cording. So today I wanted to bring you a solo episode. I don't do that as often as I used to, but sometimes I like to come in and just chat with you guys a little bit more intimately. But this episode is coming out just during a week that's always really hard for me, or it has been for the past 5 years as I'm recording this. And just this is the week that's the anniversary of when my father passed away. And just for a little background, if you're new to this podcast, my second book, The Farewell Tour, is about my experience as a young caregiver. Really the book that I would have loved to have had when I was 31 years old and my father was diagnosed with advanced inoperable pancreatic cancer. And my mother and my sister and I just threw our lives upside down to be there and just help to make his journey the best that it could be. And, I just remember going into it thinking, I'm a dietitian. I've been, at that point in my career, I had worked for several years in an ALS clinic, and I was like, well, if something really horrible ever happens to one of my family members, I think I'll know what to do. And there were some things that were not easy, but that I felt equipped to handle. But then there were other things that I just was like, man, why is there not a manual for this stuff? So it was a really challenging, isolating experience where I learned a lot of things the hard way. And that was really why I wrote my second book, which is called The Farewell Tour, A Caregiver's Guide to Stress Management, Sane Nutrition, and Better Sleep. Each section in the book covers a different area of the caregiver journey. So, I talk. The first section, we talk a lot about stress management. I spend a lot of time on nutrition because that's my training. A lot of this sane nutrition, so to speak. A lot of it's really about supporting blood sugar balance, which is so key to our energy, our mood, our stress response, so many things. Then, of course, I do touch on exercise. Making time for movement even when you feel like you have no time. That's a big thing. But then I get into other things. Obviously sleep. That was my top struggle when I was on that caregiver journey. But then spirituality, emotional well-being, there's an entire section on navigating relationships. I think 31, 32-year-old me definitely could have used support in that area. But then, dealing with end of life, how to be there for somebody who's going through that and how to take care of yourself in that process. And what was a really fun part of working on this book, actually, was, my father was in the music industry. That was where the book got its title from, because we jokingly called his last months of his life the farewell tour, because as he put it, he was like, once they find out you're dying, everybody wants a piece of you. So we started calling it the farewell tour, and it was a way of adding some lightness to a really, what could have been, and honestly at points really was a really dark journey. But I remember as I sat down to work on this book, I was really thinking about the fact that the role of the caregiver, it made me think a lot about, for my dad's work, we would often go to different shows. He worked in on the promotion side of the music for most of my life. He started out doing different things earlier in his career, but he spent the majority of his career in promotions. So I remember going to shows with him as a kid and teen and an adult, and just seeing all the moving pieces backstage. And it's not just the artist up there doing their thing, maybe with the band, right? It's there's production, there's the road crew, there's the managers, the label, there's a whole team, and they all have these really intense jobs. And I found that being on that caregiver path with somebody, supporting someone going through a difficult illness or somebody with ongoing needs, Does not have to be end of life, but in my family's case it was. It reminded me a lot of like thinking about like the road crew for these big acts, because every day you're driving to a new city, it's a new thing happening, and it's really intense, and you're trying to kind of like you know what to do, but then you're having to apply that to a different situation all the time, and you're exhausted. You're going into unfamiliar situations along the way, and it's just kind of hold on for dear life at times. And you need to travel light too. Sometimes we talk about the self-care toolbox, right? I hear that term come up a lot, the toolbox. Ugh, the fucking toolbox. And sometimes we don't have space for an entire damn box of self-care routines, right? We have to keep it simple. So I use the example of a backpack, something a little lighter. That's why when I was working on this book, I was like, okay, so maybe somebody won't struggle in all of these areas, but what's maybe one thing that you feel is out of balance that you want to bring some more balance into? So unlike my first book, The Little Book of Game Changers, which I wrote intentionally so anybody could flip it open to any random chapter and just start there, The Farewell Tour does have a story. It does have a more chronological story that's involved, but by all means, not every single section has to be something that somebody is applying those tools at that point in their life. But they're there when you need them. Take something out of your backpack, put something new in. But I wanted to share today a few things that, every burned out caregiver needs to hear. This was a big deal for me when I was supporting my father. And, it was hard to articulate at the time, because how do you, like maybe there are people who are good at saying, hey, I really need to hear this right now. Can you just I want you to just tell me these things. Like, I respect people who can do that. I am a recovering people pleaser. I was brought up to not ask for a lot, not to take up a lot of space, to rock the boat. Like, I've had to learn as an adult that it's actually a strength to ask for what you need and to ask for help and support. But I wanted to share today 5 things every burned out caregiver needs to hear. So let's start off with a really, really big one, that this does not just apply to caregivers, but especially caregivers who are really burned out and just feeling like they are just not doing a good enough job. And that is, you're doing a great job. Really. The role of the caregiver, whether, and what I write about does have more to do with family caregivers, but this can also apply to people who are caregivers professionally as their job. You're doing great. You are showing up and doing your best, and that counts for a lot. We put so much pressure on ourselves to be perfect, and there is no such thing as perfection. So, yeah, we might have a day where we feel like things didn't go the way we wanted them to, or we could have done better, but just being there, showing up, counts for a ton. In the relationship chapter of the book, I do talk about we can't even call this a relationship, a situationship that I was in during the time for most of my dad's illness. In the book, I share the experience of 2 different relationships I had, but one was very healthy, positive. One was not so much, but I learned a lot. And I remember I would sometimes, because I needed to talk about it to someone who wasn't my therapist, and also, if someone would say, how was your day? Like, if my day had involved like trying to get work done and taking my dad to chemo, and then worrying about this, that, and the other thing, and trying to get my own self-care done and do more work, it was like yeah, my day. About that. And I just remember he always used to say to me, he's like, well, you're a good daughter. And I just remember being like, yeah, okay, that is something. He just couldn't talk about it, and I was not really good at articulating that I needed to talk about it, that I needed to have some positive reinforcement that my best was still somehow good enough. Another big thing that I think every burned out caregiver needs to hear is, how are you feeling? This is something that today, when I am talking to, maybe it's a patient or a client who is in a caregiver role, or a friend, somebody that I know is in a position where they are taking care of somebody, and there's a lot of demands on them, often demands they are putting on themselves. Just it's hard to talk about your own needs sometimes. I remember feeling like I couldn't complain about things too, because I was like, well, why am I bent out of shape about this stupid thing? My dad's going through chemo. Like, I don't deserve to complain. I remember I had to get a root canal in the middle of. I had some of my own medical issues when he was sick, like the winter, where he was really sick, and I almost died, actually, which is really, it was kind of like a slow burn of a near-death experience. Like, it was just me being so checked out of my own body. I didn't realize that there were signs that my body was sending me that something was wrong, until it was an emergency situation. And I remember, like, not wanting to tell my parents what had happened because I didn't want to worry them. But I was really freaked out. Like, for a few days afterwards, I was just like, oh my God, I got so lucky. And how did I let that happen? And it was so intense. But I remember feeling like I wished I had a sign flashing above my head saying, like, please don't be a jerk to me. Please be kind to me. Like, just, I'm going through a lot right now. And I think that I wish that I had been a little bit more forthcoming with some of the people in my life, and just been willing to take that risk of being a bummer, being a downer, putting the burden on them, and just talking about my feelings a little bit more. Remember, I felt like I had to be very stoic. And I think sometimes, there is this tendency when we're in that caregiver role to be putting the person we're caring for first above all else. And I think to some degree, like, that's not, it's not a terrible thing, that is your instinct to be caring deeply for that person. That's a good thing. You care about them. But when we neglect our own well-being, that's when it can become a problem and make it harder for us to be effective caregivers. And I think that if there is a caregiver in your life, I think it's a good idea to ask them how they're feeling. Another thing that can come up, on a similar note, is, do you want to talk about it? This can be very valuable. I would say definitely ask your caregiver friends, family members, if they need to talk. Because sometimes it's really hard to say, I'm going through really hard stuff right now and I need to talk about it. I know my experience, and I know a lot of my patients and clients who've been caregivers have shared with me, is that they feel like they can't talk about it, because they're worried that people would be disgusted with them for having anything but, blind optimism or a drive to make things better. If they express feelings of human emotion, that somehow that is weakness, or makes them a bad caregiver because they, drop the ball from caregiving to think about their own needs for a moment, right? And we're all human. We all need to process our feelings. That's how we build strength and resilience, how we continue to show up. And it can be really hard, though, to talk, to say, hey, I'm going through this really difficult thing right now, and I need to tell you about it, or I need to tell someone about it. Like, sometimes people say, oh, go to a caregiver support group. And often there's not freaking time for that. It's like you can barely get together to brush your teeth, right? Like, who's gonna haul ass to a support group? If you're listening to this and you are in a caregiver support group, and it is broadening your horizons, it's enriching your experience, it's serving you, amazing. I am so happy you're taking advantage of that really awesome resource. But sometimes when you're in the thick of it, it can be really hard to see through and be like, oh yes, I deserve to process and communicate what I'm feeling. So ask your caregiver friends, do you want to talk about it? Something else that can sometimes be really helpful to hear, kind of building on that, is, this really sucks, and it's okay not to feel okay, and I'm here for you no matter what. Sometimes we think that people in our life only want to hear the good stuff. right? How often have you had that experience where you're passing someone in the hallway and say, hey, how are you today? And you say, great. Meanwhile, you're having a terrible day. I remember showing up to work the day after I had a miscarriage, and I had only told maybe 2 people, because they needed to know, like, why I was out sick from work the day before. And, like, and it was really hard to just make normal conversation and just be like, but I still felt that pressure to be like, yeah, everything's good. It's a normal Tuesday. Yeah. Okay. Like, I remember when I was caring for my dad, he wanted us to keep his illness, a secret from people outside of our immediate, like, everyday in-person interactions. Like, my employers knew, and some of my close friends knew, but, we weren't talking about it on social media. We weren't supposed to be talking about it to people outside the fold, so to speak. And that was hard, because it was just like I felt like I was living a double life a lot of the time. And I remember sometimes even too with friends, I felt pressure to act like everything was okay. And honestly, after my dad passed away, I remember when people would talk about him, even just responding to condolence cards was really wacky, because I felt this weird pressure to comfort other people, or somehow try to put a, not light spin on. Definitely, humor was hard to, like, within our family, we laughed a lot, but, I remember just feeling like I had to comfort other people about it. And I think the people that, the friends that I really, who made me feel just so much better, are the people that I could be really honest with. Like, I remember having a few friends with whom I would have these, like, long text conversations where we could be real, and not to have, sometimes there are times in your life when you want to be told that everything's going to be okay, right? I think we all have that. But sometimes when you're in a situation where you know that the outcome that's coming is not something you want, where you really are, it's really becoming about making the best of whatever time you have now. Like, it doesn't feel good to have somebody like, oh, everything's going to be fine, or everything happens for a reason. And you're just like, that's bullshit. Everything does not happen for a reason. If, like, and this is coming from someone who really does believe everything happens for a reason. Like, shitty things still happen. And I think that it can be really valuable, if you have the kind of relationship with someone where you can be honest with them, and kind of, if somebody is in the very, like, optimistic phase, like you have a caregiver friend who's like, yeah, everything, we're really fighting, we're going great, I'm feeling so blessed, and, like, I wouldn't start with, that really sucks what you're going through. Like, I would say, like, if that's language that, they're having, like, they're articulating, they're having a hard time, or, you're already in that place where you can be real with them. Like, it's okay to say, like, yes, this really sucks, but I wouldn't open with that if you're not sure where they're at. Just a little note there. But yes, please, like, emphasize that it's okay to feel your feelings. You don't have to be on all the time. And remind that person, remind that burned out caregiver in your life that you are there for them no matter what. I think sometimes when someone is really in it, it's hard to really remember the tools that you have, the people that are there for you. It can feel really isolating. So just being reminded that you're there for them can do so, so much good. And then on that note, sometimes, and I've been guilty of this too, of saying, can I do anything? Or let me know if you need anything. And that's nice. It's not a bad thing to say, but I think then that puts the pressure on the person to ask you for something, which can be really hard. And sometimes someone is so overwhelmed, they don't even know where to start in terms of what kind of support to ask for. So I would say offer something specific, like, can I watch your kids? Can I bring you groceries? Clean your house? Whatever it might be. Watch your pet. Walk your dog. Feed your fish. Water your plants. Whatever it might be. That can go a long way, because you're not putting them in a position to ask you for help. You're offering something specific. And, be genuine about it. Don't offer to do something that you don't feel ready to do, or you don't feel equipped to do, or you don't want to do. Because people can tell that, and a good barometer for yourself, if you're like, well, what am I willing to do? Think about what you might be willing to offer in terms of support. And that could be very specific things. It could be, do you want me to research the side effects of that medication and print out the stuff so you don't have to, or whatever is going on that feels like you're in your wheelhouse. But, if you notice that the idea of offering a particular kind of support makes you feel like you get a pit in your stomach, like, oh my God, I really hope they don't say yes. Like, that's not something you should be offering, but something that you would gladly do for them. So I would say start there. So, these are just a few things that are important for a burnt out caregiver to hear. This is by no means an exhaustive list. These are just 5 big things that I think can be really valuable. So I hope that you found these helpful. Whether you are listening to this as a caregiver, maybe you feel seen and heard. Maybe you could send this to some people in your life who might need to hear this so they can better support you. Or if there's someone in your life who is a caregiver and you're wondering how you can better support them. These are just a few ways to do so. If you found this informative, useful, I would love to hear your thoughts. Please feel free to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. They really do matter. And you can also connect with me I'm on Instagram at Jess Cording. I'm not super active on Facebook or Twitter, but I am on Facebook at Jessica Cording Nutrition, and Twitter I'm at Jess Cording. And, if you want to connect with me, visit my website. You can sign up for my newsletter there, or you can check out my Substack. And as always, thank you so much for spending your time with me. Appreciate your energy. As always, have a wonderful day, and we'll talk soon. Thank you for listening to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. We'll see you next time.